Hi everyone, Ellen here, and I'm making 4 short videos this week since I won't be able to hold class on Tuesday. So let's just get started and dive into the topics. First, we'll talk about concepts. So we'll talk about geopolitics and energy security. Then we'll talk about some changes on the energy stage, the international energy stage, and how we use energy that have happened fairly recently. Then we'll talk about some winners. So when it comes to geopolitics and we think about who holds the power, what will we potentially see in the future? And then we'll think about 3 possible future scenarios for energy use and our planet. Okay, let's go ahead and get started by talking about some concepts. So, very first thing is, what is geopolitics? And there really is no simple definition. So I just want to highlight that it's complex. Our minds like to make things very simple. So there's something that happens and what's the cause? We shoot for a simple thing when usually it's very complicated. And when we have big definitions, we usually want something simple, but it turns out not to be that simple. Some kind of broad brushstroke definition would be how geography and other things influence foreign policy, which is really behavior between nations. So when you think about geography, we think about, okay, there's a mountain range between this country, and that's going to affect how they interact. Or that particular country next to this one has a lot of resources in gold and natural gas. So it might be wealthier than the country next door. And the behavior between the two countries is going to depend on things like that. So when we talk about geography, we're talking about sort of the natural resources of a country or an area. And we're also thinking, though, beyond geography about some other things. And I just listed a few things that make sense to think about. So when we think about how nation states or nations or just regions, neighborhoods, treat one another, usually there's some sort of foreign policy that dictates that. And it depends on what the neighbors are doing. You know, if you are against nuclear development and your neighbor is just going crazy with developing nuclear weapons, that's going to cause a problem, and it's going to affect how you interact with each other. Also, who your trade partners are. So, for example, Russia is becoming a very big trade partner with China. And so whatever China does, Russia will probably go along with, because Russia has a really tiny economy, slightly larger than Spain, less than Italy, yet its neighbor is a very strong, wealthy nation state that buys stuff from it. So it's going to go in line, most likely, with what China will do. Who is a threat? So, for example, Israel and Iran both see each other as threats, and that's not a good thing, because Iran is developing a lot of nuclear weapons. Who has resources? So that can cause some challenges, particularly if an area isn't very well developed in terms of policy. It can lead to a lot of war and strife. Who's making claims on what's not theirs? Plenty of examples in history of that, and we'll look at one particular example as we go along. And who controls things like trade routes? That'll be really important. If I have a lot of wealth and I want to get it to my consumer over there, and the only way I can do it is if I go in that direction, which crosses someone's land, and they say, no, I can't, then that's going to cause some problems also. So you can tell, it really is like living in a neighborhood and having one neighbor that's doing things you don't like, one neighbor that has things you need, and just challenges in between. Yet it's on a very large scale. And not only does geography affect this, but also culture. So we think about how culture and, let's say, religious preferences and other things can just layer onto these challenges. Okay, so that's geopolitics. So how countries or nation states or regions treat one another, really, based on a lot of things. So the interesting thing is that when we think about politics and geopolitics, it always involves power and security. So power is really like having as much as you can of anything. It doesn't really matter. But if you have a lot of it, then you have more power, particularly if it's something that others need, like oil or water or that kind of thing. Security really deals with protecting what you have. So once you have it, you want to make sure that you continue having it so that you don't lose any degree of power and that kind of thing. So those are some concepts when you think about geopolitics. One thing you'll want to think of is, okay, power, security, and then how neighboring or even distant regions treat one another based on things they need, they don't have, that sort of thing. So when we think about energy security, one thing that hopefully you've realized at this point, either through this class or before in your just experience, is that, for us to survive and be healthy, happy human beings in societies, we need easy access to things like water, which means we need physical access, and we need a way to be able to pay for it that's affordable. If we didn't have physical access, that would be a problem. And if we couldn't pay for it, if it were there but it was too expensive, that would also be a problem. That also applies to things like bread. So there was a major conflict that took place because of high bread prices in a particular region that came from some challenges in agriculture very, very far away, but affected prices. And that led to, a lot of disruption, and people did not fare very well. But we need things. We need water, we need food, we need shelter. We also need energy. So by now, what you know about energy includes that we use it to stay warm, we use it to cook, we use it to make things that we want. And so it's not just a modern society thing. We definitely use it for electricity, and that's a new phenomenon. But it goes all the way back to who had access to wood for biofuel, who had access to these things where they could actually live a life that was easier and more comfortable. So energy would rank up there with one of our basic needs. So to have energy security, we also need to have physical access to energy and to be able to afford it. So for many of us, that includes things like in our history, that's included things like coal and natural gas and petroleum. Still a big part of a lot of our lives, and the shift that is happening very slowly, probably in some ways, and very quickly in others, is the same. Can we have the same security with things like solar and wind and hydro and geothermal and those sorts of things? So I wanted to mention the basic definition of energy security here. The other thing, with our sort of sustainability lens, we want to make sure that we not only have physical access to it and that it's affordable, but also that it doesn't have detrimental effects on the environment. So here we're looking at the availability of energy supply as this top circle. Let's see if I get this right. To you, I think this is right. Maybe it's over here. There is environmental concerns. So we think about, are we using energy efficiently so we don't need to use too much? Are we using it in a way that doesn't create too much pollution? That kind of thing. And then with price, one interesting thing is that if we can make access to energy more global at reasonable costs, then we're looking at something that's good for everybody. There's some sort of energy equity. So not only you and I, but people who don't have electricity now would also have electricity and be able to benefit from that. Okay, so here's another way of looking at this. Energy security, energy equity, and environmental sustainability is really what our big goals are. And interestingly, in 2020, if we were to rank the countries that do this the best, we would see that Switzerland is at the top. The UK ties with France at number 5, and the United States is number 9. So we're doing okay, but this will probably shift over time, and it'll shift because we'll start using different resources, and we'll have different amounts to spend on each resource and be able to provide these things in a way that we want to differently. So this ranking will probably shift fairly quickly over the next 10, 20 years. All right, so that's those are the main concepts I wanted to cover in this video. So we looked at the basic idea of geopolitics. There's not a simple definition, but it's basically how neighboring countries deal with one another based on several things. So that's a fairly open definition, but you get the point, I hope. Energy security, so economic and physical security of energy resources, and energy goals include energy security, energy equity, and environmental sustainability. So that's all I'll introduce in this video, and I'll see you in the next one.